A few days ago, I played Resident Evil 7 for the first time, and after finishing it, I thought I had a pretty good idea of where the series was heading. Resident Evil 7 felt like a reset. It brought back exploration, backtracking, puzzles, and a more grounded atmosphere. So naturally, I expected Village to continue in that direction. But it did not. Just to give you an idea, if I had made a bingo card before playing Resident Evil Village, I don't really think I would have gotten a single thing right. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Actually, that's probably the weirdest part about Village. I ended up enjoying it a lot more than I expected to, while at the same time feeling more confused about the future of Resident Evil. So I wanted to talk about that. There are going to be spoilers, so if you haven't played the game yet and you plan to, I'd recommend doing that first. With that out of the way, let's get started. I want to start with the gameplay because honestly, I had a great time with it. As someone who likes Metroidvanias, Village is probably one of my favorite Resident Evil games when it comes to exploration and backtracking. I loved constantly returning to older areas with new tools and finding things I couldn't access before. The village itself works really well as a central hub, and every time I came back to it there was usually something new waiting for me. The enemies are some of the weakest parts of the game for me, but honestly I don't think Capcom has really gotten regular enemies right since Resident Evil 5, so it's not really a huge deal. The bosses, on the other hand, are a massive improvement over Resident Evil 7. They are more memorable, they have more interesting mechanics, and they are generally much better presented. So overall, from a gameplay perspective, I genuinely liked Village, which is probably why the story caught me so off guard. Because the more I enjoyed playing the game, the more I found myself wondering where exactly Resident Evil is supposed to go from here. Now, don't get me wrong, I actually think the story is well written and it makes sense. The problem is that it feels like Village takes Resident Evil into territory that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. Mold is probably the biggest example. I understand the basic concept, but the more powers it introduced, the more I started wondering what the limits actually are. How exactly does this thing give people electromagnetic powers? How does it allow shape-shifting? I get the whole Cadu thing, but at some point it started feeling like the mold could basically do whatever the story needs it to do. That's where I started getting worried, because even Las Plagas or the C virus felt more believable to me. The mold just feels too random. It's like they can generate whatever power they want with it, and it worries me that the story won't take itself seriously anymore. I understand that there's a connection between it and Umbrella, but after they finish this arc, I can't see where they'll go from the mode to other bioweapons. And what feels odd to me is that the powers are becoming stronger on cutscenes, but not on actual gameplay. I think the Lords are probably the best example of what I'm talking about. They're great characters, they have presence, they're introduced really well, but when you get to actually fight them, they use their powers in the worst way possible. If I had to pick one character that represents that shift the most, it would probably be Heisenberg. The guy is basically Magneto, and honestly that should make him one of the biggest threats in the entire series. He could probably kill Ethan in 100 different situations, but the moment we actually fight him, he just throws all that away and turns himself into a pile of garbage. So while I did enjoy the story overall, moments like that made it harder for me to fully buy into everything that was happening. Aside from those nitpicks, it was great, just a little confused in how to feel about the story. It's good but feels like a fantasy world, not like what I would expect from a Resident Evil game. I mean, we didn't even have a use this moment. And I guess now we know what happens when we don't have that. But funnily enough, the character that ended up grounding the story the most for me was Ethan. Back in Resident Evil 7, I never really connected with him. He barely talked, his interactions with Mia weren't particularly interesting, and compared to characters like Leon or Chris, he felt pretty forgettable. Village changed that. For the first time, Ethan actually felt like his own character. I liked seeing a different dynamic with the introduction of a father figure to the series in contrast to Chris and Leon, who are more like Giga Chads. Everything he did revolved around protecting his family. Because of that, his ending actually worked for me and created a full circle moment. I genuinely didn't expect Capcom to kill him, but looking back, I think it was the right decision. If Ethan had survived everything that happened in the village, he would have basically become an overpowered character for the rest of the series. His death gave his story a proper conclusion, and honestly the DLC only reinforced that feeling. But ironically, that's also why Rosemary worries me. Because if Ethan was already becoming too powerful, then what exactly are they supposed to do with her? She feels stronger than Wesker, and at this point I have a hard time imagining her becoming a main protagonist without the power scaling getting completely out of control. Maybe she'll mostly appear in side content, I honestly don't know. Speaking of things that are absurdly overpowered though, how exactly did Ethan not realize something was wrong with him? The guy gets his hand cut off, puts it back on, then does it again, and somehow never questions any of it. At some point I started wondering whether that green liquid is secretly like the greatest medical breakthrough in human history, or maybe the mold just messed with his brain and he can't discern reality anymore. Anyway, now let's talk about Chris, because honestly, Chris might be my biggest problem with the writing in this game. They never got his character right again. I can only hear Carlos in there, to me it doesn't suit the character. But let's forget that part. He spends years training Ethan, and apparently cues Ethan's wife in front of him, refuses to explain anything, treats him like a nuisance, and somehow expects him to cooperate. I understand the explanation the game eventually gives, like Chris mentions the possibility that Ethan could have been infected. But come on, you're telling me a veteran with Chris's experience couldn't come up with a better way to handle that situation? A simple, "I'll explain everything later" would have solved half of the conflicts in the game. Instead, he spends most of the story acting really hostile for no reason, and I still have a hard time accepting that. Hopefully they get him right and Code Veronica, because that character deserves better. And one last personal nitpick that isn't really a big deal, but it was something I noticed almost immediately. Village removes a lot of the immersive animation that were present in Resident Evil 7. I understand why, the game is faster and more action oriented, but I still miss them. Those little details made RE7 feel more grounded, and their absence was surprisingly noticeable for me. And honestly, that's probably why I'm still so conflicted about Village, because I really like it. I liked playing it, I liked Ethan, the exploration, most of the bosses, but at the same time it feels like Village is pushing Resident Evil into a direction that I'm still not sure how I feel about. Maybe it will lead to something great, maybe it will create even more problems. I guess we'll find out.